Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the St. Louis Rams at the Baltimore Ravens in their Week 11 matchup played November 22nd, 2015. We're going to go over the scores and the stats and give our breakdown and analysis. So the Ravens ended up missing a field goal in the first quarter, a 51-yard attempt by Justin Tucker with about a little less than 4 minutes left to play in the first quarter, and that would end up setting up St. Louis with the ball on their own 41, and a pass interference call would bring them into the red zone, and Todd Gurley would end up scoring on a 1-yard touchdown to put the first points on the board as Greg Zuerlein added the extra point to make it 7-0 Rams over the Ravens. So now these teams were trading punts, and we were into the second quarter. Joe Flacco was intercepted by McLeod, but the Rams were not able to turn that turnover into points on the scoreboard. They would, however, get on the board with the final play in the first half, a 25-yard field goal by Justin Tucker, and it was now 7-3 as the Ravens cut the Rams' lead to 4. So that was the score at halftime. Then to start off the second half, the Ravens would actually turn the ball over on downs on their first possession. Then after a punt by each team, the Rams would end up fumbling the ball as Case Keenum would fumble, and it was actually recovered by McClellan, and it was actually a matter of a botched snap. So now the Ravens would take over, but then 3 plays later, they ended up with another turnover themselves as Flacco was intercepted, this time by Johnson. So now the Rams would take advantage to turn that turnover into 7 points as Case Keenum hit Lance Kendricks for a 30-yard touchdown 3 plays later. Zuerlein added, he went for the attempt, but it was blocked, and so they did not have an extra point. It was now a 10-point lead, though, for the Rams as they were up 13-3. So now the Ravens would go 3 and out, and the Rams would punt on their next possession, and then the Ravens punted again, and now the Rams turned the ball over. Another fumble, this one by Todd Gurley, forced by Williams and recovered by Upshaw. So now the Ravens would take over and take advantage as they were in St. Louis territory. They got down inside the red zone, and they ended up with a 3-yard touchdown pass from Flacco to Aiken. Tucker added the extra point, and it was now a 3-point game with the score St. Louis 13, Baltimore 10. The Rams would punt on their next possession, and now the Ravens would end up getting a field goal as they drove down into field goal range and into the red zone, but they were not able to get into the end zone. They were knocking on the door. They were on the 2-yard line. Instead, they'd have to settle for a 20-yard field goal by Tucker that tied this game up at 13 apiece with only 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. So now the Rams would get the ball with 5 minutes left, just over 5 minutes left, and they would drive down into field goal range for a long field goal attempt, a 52-yard attempt by Greg Zuerlein with less than 2 minutes left to play to take the lead, but it was wide right. So the missed field goal would set up the Ravens on their own 42. They would get into St. Louis territory, and on 4th and 5 from the 33, Tucker would attempt a 51-yard field goal, and it was wide right as well. So Tucker missed the field goal, his second missed field goal of this game, this one coming with just over a minute left to play in the fourth quarter as we were still tied at 13. So now the Rams took over after that missed field goal, as both teams had missed field goals here coming down the stretch, and now the Rams were ended up faced with a 3rd and 5 from their own 46, and Case Keenum was sacked by Upshaw. He forced the fumble, and it was recovered by Guy, and so now the Ravens would take over on the St. Louis 41, and Flacco ended up getting injured on this last possession, but he toughed it out. He stayed in the game, and Justin Tucker would come out to attempt a 47-yard field goal on the very last play in regulation after having just missed a field goal just over a minute earlier, and it was up and it was good, and the Ravens win this game 16-13. They improve to 3-7, 2-3 at home, but they lose 4 set to the broken arm, and then Flacco, as it turns out, tore his ACL and MCL, although he did stay in the game to finish it out and get the win for Baltimore. but he's done for the season. And the Rams are now 4-6 on the season. They've only won one game on the road. They're 1-4 on the road. And the Rams, with this loss, a very costly loss, of course, they're now in third place in their division as they trail the Seahawks by a game, and they trail the Cardinals by 4 games in the NFC West. And the Ravens, they're in third place as well in their division, 5 games out of first place behind Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, who they're 2 games behind out of, actually 3 games behind second place. So both teams not really going anywhere, and the Ravens kind of ruined the Rams' chances at potentially making a run. They're not quite done, but in their division, they don't really have much of a chance of making a run at the Cardinals. And they had an outside shot at a wild card, possibly. And that's not quite out of the question yet, but it's going to be a lot tougher after losing this game to Baltimore. And St. Louis, of course, with the 4 turnovers. Baltimore with 2 turnovers as well. So this was kind of a sloppy game. It was a low-scoring game. A lot of defense. Both teams struggling on offense. Even Tucker, who hit the game winner, had missed a couple of field goals in this game. But let's look at the stats, though. Joe Flacco, 27 for 44, 299 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Allen had 22 carries for 67 yards. At their 4th set had gone down. He had just 4 carries for 26 yards. And Crockett Gilmore, 5 receptions for 101 yards. Aiken had 5 receptions for 50 yards and a touchdown. Allen also had 5 receptions for 48 yards to go along with his 67 rushing yards, giving him 115 total yards on the game. And for the Rams, Case Keenum, just 12 for 26, 136 yards, 1 touchdown. Todd Gurley had 25 carries for 66 yards and a rushing touchdown. And Tavon Austin, 1 carry for 16 yards and 1 reception for 5 yards. Lance Kendricks, 2 receptions for 43 yards and a touchdown. We look at the kickers. Justin Tucker, 3 for 5 on the field goals in this game, 1 for 1 on the extra points. Greg Zuerlein, 0 for 1 on the field goals, 1 for 2 on the extra points. We look at the defense for the Ravens. Upshaw had a sack and that forced fumble. Of course, that was the same play as he came up super clutch on that last defensive stop, turning over the ball and giving their team a chance to win this one in regulation with that field goal by Tucker. Williams also had a forced fumble. And for the Rams, Aaron Donald had a sack. McLeod had an interception, and Johnson had an interception. McLeod also forced a fumble, and Westbrooks had a forced fumble as well. We look at the team stats: 16 first downs for the Ravens, 13 first downs for the Rams. And on 4th down, the Ravens 4-16, 25% conversion rate, 3 of 13 for the Rams, 23% conversion rate. Look at total net yards: 388 for the Ravens, 213 for the Rams. Net rushing yards: 96 for Baltimore, 82 for St. Louis. Net passing yards: 292 for the Ravens. Joe Flacco sacked just once for a loss of 7 yards. And for the Rams, 131 net passing yards. Keenum sacked once for a loss of 5 yards. We look at the penalties in this game. The Ravens were heavily penalized. They had more than 100 yards over than the Rams in terms of penalties. So they had 10 penalties for 137 yards. Still, despite this, they were able to hold on and win this one. And the Rams, 6 penalties for just 35 yards. Of course, that was due in large part, in terms of the victory for the Ravens, was the fact that they forced 5 fumbles, recovering 4. They fumbled twice themselves, and they only lost 0. So they didn't lose any. When we look at the red zone, the Ravens 1 for 3, just 33%. The game would have been as close if they had capitalized on those opportunities. Also, the 2 missed field goals as well, as they left some points on the field. And the Rams were 1 for 1 in the red zone, 100%, but they only made the 1 trip to the red zone, as the Ravens were shutting them down on the offensive side with their defense. And the time of possession: 32 minutes, 52 seconds for Baltimore, 27 minutes and 8 seconds for St. Louis. So the Ravens, they have a decent defense. I mean, I know their record's pretty bad, of course. They're without Suggs, as he's not, he was lost to the injuries, and now more injuries as Flacco and Forsett are now gone. And that's pretty much it for the Ravens here in 2015, is they're now going to be pretty much just finishing out the season. It'll be unlikely that they win another game. If they do, it will be due to their defense. And they're pretty much going to be looking to see where they end up in the draft, with the potential of being, in the top 5, if not the top pick in the draft. That's about what they have to look forward to in this season, just seeing where do they end up in the draft. Whereas the Rams still have an outside shot at the playoffs, but this loss is going to make that a really tough proposition. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and had a great weekend and enjoyed all the sports.